Welcome to SB Talks. Today is Tuesday, July 14th. I am Vincent O'Neill and I am joined as ever by Nick Ryder. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Vinny.
Now today, Nick and I will be discussing the US announcement of a 20% toll on the Strait of Hormuz, hyperscalers pivoting to develop their own proprietary silicon, as well as the US Fed at a key data inflection point. Welcome to you, our listeners. So we are one step forward and three steps back, it looks, on the Middle East conflict, with President Trump announcing overnight that the US will charge a 20% toll and be reinstating the blockade on Iranian ports.
Yeah, so I mean, we're still in this sort of twilight zone where the ceasefire is probably technically still in place, but there's been obviously a lot of conflict with Iranian attacks on ships transiting close to the Oman coastline, which was done to sort of prevent them being attacked by Iranian missiles. So there's a lot of debate, you know, the Iranians saying, well, under Section 5 of the 14-point MOU, you know, we control the strait, and so, Donald Trump, who will be addressing the nation at 11 a.m. our time, has said that they'll be reimposing the blockade and they'll be charging a 20% toll on all traffic going
on the
through.
Value of the goods in
That's
cargo.
right.
Yeah.
I put that in context. A fully laden oil tanker, that would be about $32 million for that.
For the toll.
For the value of for the toll.
Yeah.
And that compared to, I think it was at $1 or $2 million per ship, or roughly $1 a barrel under the Iranian tolling regime.
Proposal.
So it's a lot more, you know, and it's not clear whether it's even legal to do that. So we'll have to wait and see.
Whether it's enforceable, whether it's real, unfortunately, that's the sort of the story. But it's clear that, as has been the case, this is a real leverage. US knows it, Iran knows it, and that's why the battle is over, particularly control of the strait, because that is the one trump card, pardon the terrible pun, that Iran has to play in this negotiation.
No, absolutely, and there's this game of brinkmanship, I guess, that's going on. So yeah, we've seen oil prices rise almost 10% in the last 24 hours to $83 a barrel. I mean, it's still well below the peak it got to in March of almost $120 a barrel. So at the moment, everyone seems pretty relaxed, I would say. But this does have the potential to kind of escalate and drag on.
Everybody's pretty relaxed / fatigued, perhaps, by the entire situation and the changing of position and the constant brinkmanship, as you described it.
Yeah.
And the prices are well down from they were in March, but still materially above where they were prior to the conflict.
Well, that's right, and we have, you know, depleted oil stocks. They're down quite a lot. So we're in a probably slightly weaker starting position that we were, you know, 4 months ago, 3-4 months ago. So yeah, we just have to see how it plays out.
And I guess we're talking short term here. Medium term, there's ways to potentially, for other Gulf nations to begin to manage around this, things like establishing new pipelines, increasing supply through other routes. They can't be turned on immediately, but that does somewhat reduce Iran's leverage in the medium to longer term, and by that I'm talking into months and years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're talking about establishing new port facilities on the east coast of the UAE, additional pipelines. There's already a couple of pipelines from Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea, and then there's one that goes from, I think, across UAE to the east coast, and they're potentially building another one there. So over time, you're right, they will work out ways to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, but in the near term, that's more challenging.
So just on and on it goes. Any final thoughts on this one?
No, I mean, I think it is something that is challenging to resolve in the short term, you know, and that's why there's a new acronym, you know, similar to the Mexican food theme of taco. The new one is NACHO.
What have we got there?
Not a chance Hormuz opens.
Okay, it's a tad bleak, but that is probably where we sit today.
Yeah.
So, good one. Might step across, there's been quite a lot of evolution in the AI space in recent weeks. Nvidia has definitely been the early beneficiary of the hyperscaler spending, but we're now seeing them pivot and rapidly shifting towards developing their own silicon. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole thing about token economics or tokenomics. The cost of...
Explain that.
Well, the unit of AI is a token, which is about, I think, there's about 1.4 tokens per word. So if you want to think about it that way, so when you put in a chat prompt, you consumes a certain number of tokens, and then when the chatbot responds, it generates a certain number of tokens. And so what they've found is token usage has gone up a lot, particularly for companies that have been experimenting, and they're starting to get the bills for these and freaking out. So now there's a real focus on bringing out sort of cheaper models. And if you need cheaper models, then you probably need cheaper chips. So a lot of the big providers, pretty much all of them, are developing their own custom ASICs. ASIC is an application-specific integrated circuit. So these are chips specifically designed for particular tasks like chatbot inference or training.
So much more scoped chips than the sort of Nvidia all-powerful.
Yeah, so the Nvidia ones are general purpose. These ones are very specific to a particular role. So the ones that, so Google's been developing, it's up to its 8th generation of what's called a TPU, a tensor processing unit. Amazon has Trainium 3. So these are chips that they've been working on for many, many years that they're using internally, and now they're starting to offer them to their own customers in their own data centers. So they're taking those out to the broader market. Anthropic is reportedly working with Samsung on developing its own custom chip. Meta has one called MTIA. Huawei, the Chinese company, has their own chips. Obviously, they're subject to sanctions or export controls, so they can't import the latest Nvidia chips. So they're developing their own. OpenAI has developed one called Jalapeño.
On the continuum of that theme.
Yeah, the Mexican theme. Yeah. So they're all trying to develop these chips. And for example, Trainium 3 is reportedly to run inference is 50% cheaper than Nvidia. So they can run, they can generate tokens at half the cost of using Nvidia chips. So you can see why all these companies are trying to get away from the Nvidia monopoly. And gradually what we're seeing is Nvidia's market share of data center chips is falling. It was something like 95%, and it's gradually falling as more companies, And
evolving to a space where different models will be appropriate for different uses, and people aren't going to want to use the all-powerful, all-singing, all-dancing model for simple use cases.
Yeah.
It's just going to be too expensive.
I mean, that said, Nvidia is still leading, and they've developed these things called Vera Rubin racks. And what they're doing now is they're creating not just the chips, the GPUs, but they're also doing the networking, how these chips talk to each other. Right. So the NV links, so they have these things called a Vera Rubin NVL72, which is basically a supercomputer rack, cost $9 million each. Wow. So they're sort of pivoting away just from chips to this whole sort of solution, including, the GPU, the CPU, the networking, the liquid cooling, all of that.
I think we're probably seeing it as we've got this huge spend out towards data centers, particularly led in the US, that everybody's just becoming somewhat more conscious about the marginal dollar and how it is being deployed.
That's right. It's interesting, actually. Also we're having central bankers now saying, maybe AI is inflationary.
Featured in the recent RBA minutes.
Yeah, so the RBA minutes, spoke about, the explosion in data center investment. They're saying that could exacerbate capacity pressures and skills shortages in other parts of the economy. We know the Australian economy is sort of running up against capacity pressures, and so when you have, $12.3 billion spent on equipment and machinery in the last year in Australia. You have Anthropic announcing a 1.5 gigawatt, $22 billion data center investment here. That just puts a bit more, pressures onto an already sort of capacity constrained economy and potentially adds to some of these inflation pressures. And we've had the same thing in the US. New York Fed President John Williams said, demand driven by AI could be an inflation driver. Whereas, Kevin Walsh has said, longer term, AI could be deflationary. Well, that may be true, but in the short term, it's potentially inflationary.
That was probably the original premise of his argument of why rates should be cut because of the deflationary impact of AI. I guess backed away from that whole position quite a bit since a few months ago, but it's probably a really key theme impacting central banks and governments more broadly in terms of what are the productivity impacts, what is the return on the investment, and therefore if you don't get the productivity, then it's going to be inflationary.
Yeah, and what are the financial risks? So we've had the Bank of International Settlements warning about, this could be a bubble. What happens if it bursts? What does that do to sort of the financial stability of major banks and the financial system if that does burst? So there's all sorts of warnings out there about it.
Very much so. Anything else catching your eye on that sort of central bank or data space?
We've got, Kevin Walsh is doing his congressional testimony this evening, so that'll be interesting to see if he reveals anything. We know his style is not to give too much away. At the Sintra meeting, ECB meeting a couple of weeks ago, he did say we're going to have a big family fight at the July meeting. And certainly the minutes of the Fed meeting from June suggested that quite a few voters thought that rates might need to go up. And tonight we get the US inflation numbers for June. So if they're a bit hotter than expected, then we could definitely get a rate hike at the July meeting. So we just have to kind of see what all of this reveals over the next day or so.
Quite a delicate inflection point there.
But the market is priced about 40% chance of a rate hike in July and 100% chance by the end of the year.
Right, so that is quite a change in position from several months ago.
Definitely.
And one other item, we're sort of heading into reporting season to look at the quarter just ended June. What are expectations? What are the market's potentially lofty expectations from company earnings?
Yeah, so as we remember back from March, we had a very strong earnings season. And so that's sort of rolled forward to the second quarter, the June quarter. And the market's looking for year-on-year earnings growth of just under 24%, and 20% if you exclude the energy sector, which has obviously been a big variable in recent months. And revenue to grow about 11%. So another strong quarter is sort of baked into market pricing.
So market's potentially sensitive to anything that doesn't quite hit those lofty expectations.
Well, that's right. I mean, last week we saw Samsung beat expectations, and yet its stock dropped quite a lot.
Based on their guidance of where to from here.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting time in the markets where they've certainly had a strong run and looking for reasons to justify that run continuing.
Definitely.
An excellent overview as always, Nick. Thank you very much, and thank you to you, our listeners.